Hi, everybody. This is Warren. I'm recording this from my living room in the middle of the night. I've had a number of people ask me for some more information on some things we touched on in class and some comments that I made about MySQL and MySQL Workbench. So I'm putting together this video for fellow Mac users like myself to hopefully clear things up and share that information. One thing I did want to make really clear that maybe not is obvious for everybody is that MySQL Server and MySQL Workbench are actually two different software packages. We're installing both, but they really are separate things, and they're just communicating to each other over a network connection. MySQL Server is a database server product in a family of products broadly known as Relational Database Management Systems, or RDBSs, if you prefer the acronym and alphabet soup. One thing to know about servers and services is that a service is a little bit different than the kind of applications like the editor you see right here on my screen, is that services run non-interactively, meaning that they just crank up and they do their thing and they run in the background. You don't see them, you don't interact with them directly via an interface, and they're just running on your machine. So you might want to not have that happen in a development context all the time. The other thing about server software is that most of the time it doesn't plug into auto update channels. If you have the version that is installed until you download and perform an upgrade for another version. Servers often have very complicated configurations, and it's not always a great idea to have them automatically updating because it leads to brittle and unstable systems. So anytime you're dealing with server software, kind of keep that in the back of your mind and realize that, ask yourself, oh, what's my exposure with this? How is it going to be updated? And how can I mitigate that it is not going to be automatically updated and you're not going to be receiving those security fixes and those bug fixes and that errata? MySQL Workbench is, like I said, a GUI or a graphic front end that allows us to connect to that relational database management server and talk to it. We get to have a nice GUI to manage doing ad hoc queries, and we do a little bit of entity relationship modeling and diagramming, and that's kind of cool to visualize that. We can look at our table structure, and it's just a really nice way to interact with the server. But they really are two separate pieces of software that are just communicating with each other. So knowing that our server isn't going to automatically get updates, and maybe we don't want it running all the time. In our use context and in a development context, it's very normal to set our server to not start automatically. On Windows machines, you have to reconfigure your service. On Mac machines, you have this really cool thing in system preferences of a MySQL control panel, and you can just check or uncheck this box. So I would say, I would advise that you just uncheck that box, and then anytime you need to work with your MySQL instance, you just start the server with the button and stop the server when you're done. And that goes a long way to mitigate stuff. And also, if you think about it, you might, if the server's running in the background, it's using CPU and memory and disk, and maybe you want those CPU and memory and disk resources available for something else like Netflix or something more productive. So think about starting and stopping it manually instead of having it run automatically. The other thing is that when it does run, the default on MySQL is for it to listen on all addresses. You can actually ask the MySQL server what it's listening on. It's got all of these configuration variables. Bind address is the one that we care about, but if you just leave off that where clause and just say show variables, you can see all of the configuration parameters that MySQL uses. It's quite broad, it's quite extensive, and this is very common for servers. They do have very extensive, very granular, very complicated configs. But our bind address, we can confirm that we are listing asterisks, means all adapters. We're listing on every network connection this computer has. And we probably don't want that because we don't want anybody else on the network to be able to connect to our MySQL server. And maybe not everybody set a really super complicated and strong root password. So fortunately, it's pretty easy to turn that down. We can just use a configuration directive, and Mac uses something called launch daemons, and launch daemons are controlled in plist files. So I'm just going to open terminal on the Mac, and let me zoom in a little bit here. And this file is, you're going to need super user access. So I'm going to do sudo, which is super user do. And I'm going to use a text editor, Nano, that's just built into It's packaged with Mac. And then the location of that file is going to be library. And one cool thing about Bash shells or Z shells and Unix shells, if you don't already know it, is there's something called tab completion. So I type something, and when I press tab, it'll match. So I don't have to finish typing it. And not only is that cool because you have to do less typing, it's cool in that you're less likely to make a typo. And so the directory is root library / library launch daemons, services, right? And then the file for the plist is going to be com oracle oss mysql mysqld plist. And so when I open that for editing, because I'm doing sudo, it's going to ask me for my account password for administrative access. And so now I have this editor open, and this is the MySQL config file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy into my clipboard that configuration parameter that I want. And you'll see that this config file just has a section here of an array called program arguments. And then here's the array values, right? And we're just passing in at launch time all of these configuration directives in the form of key value pairs. And so I'm going to make a new line, and I'm just going to paste my new one in. And you see a nano down at the bottom of the screen in the bottom left hand, it says Control X. So I hit Control X, save modified buffer, yes. Confirm the file name, just press enter, and then boom. Now I'm going to go back to system preferences and return to my MySQL control panel. I'm going to stop my server. I enter my password. I'm going to let it finish. I'm going to start my MySQL server. And the reason I'm doing this is that the server only reads that configuration file on startup. So once you make any changes to it, you have to restart or hup that service to get it to pick up the config files. And if I go back to MySQL Workbench and I run that same query again, and by the way, on Mac, instead of a lightning bolt, Command Enter is the lightning bolt as well. You can see that now my server is only listening for connections on the localhost or loopback adapter on this machine. It's not opening up port 3306 on every network connection that this machine has and accepting query connections from anything else that's on the network, trying to get to you. So those are some things I would suggest you consider. They're pretty easy to do. It's pretty low lift, but it can make a big difference in your security footprint and also your performance. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a good day.